I've been looking for a true everyday camera, a camera that I could just take with me anywhere I go without thinking about it, a camera that can capture some everyday moments but also is capable of producing strong portfolio images when I need it to. And that's what I wanted when I downsized from a DSLR to my Fujifilm X Pro 2. But I still find myself kind of hesitating to bring it out, especially for mundane or super quick outings. And so yeah, I find myself missing a lot of moments. I always wish that I had a camera instead of my phone, and that is where this camera comes in. So right away, this camera has a little bit of a weight to it. I think that's what surprised me. I was fully expecting this camera to kind of feel plasticky and to be really light, but for a little point and shoot camera, it's actually got a little bit of a weight to it. In terms of build quality, I mean, it feels sturdy. The texture almost feels a little plasticky, but I know it's made out of magnesium alloy, so it's definitely more durable than plastic. It doesn't feel as well built as my Fuji's, but I mean, with time, we'll see how it holds up. The shutter button, it's actually not bad. I've heard it was quite mushy, so I was a little bit worried about that, and it's got some softness to it, but I think the shutter is super satisfying and super quiet. Here, I'll give you a listen. The first time I took a photo with this, I had to do a double take because I was like, this is so quiet. And overall, it just kind of makes taking pictures super fun and satisfying. Now for the screen, it's not horrible. It's not the best either. It's not going to be like the highest resolution screen out there, but I find that the colors are fairly accurate and it gets the job done. It's not the most responsive screen if you compare it to most modern cameras these days. When you look at the images on the computer, it looks way better. I also got some accessories for this camera. I know battery life isn't the best, so I picked up 2 extra batteries. And then I got a lens cap to kind of protect this camera during storage. And I know dust is a little bit of an issue with this camera, so that's on there. As for the flash, I'm using the Metalite F1 flash. I know a lot of people are using the flash from Reflex Lab, but I wanted something that had a little bit more control and power. This flash has 4 power settings, which just make it easy to adjust for any situation that I may be shooting in. Now, this thing is smaller than my hand, and I have small hands, and because of its size, it kind of feels like a toy. I think that's also a good thing because it just makes photography seem a little less serious, and it just brings the fun back. And you know, I just get so trigger happy with this thing. I think the best part is that this camera has such great image quality and great image stabilization, so when it comes to the moments where you actually do want to take more of a serious photo, this camera keeps up. Like a lot of people, I debated between the GR III and the GR IIIx. They both have different focal lengths, with the GR III being at 28mm and the GR IIIx at 40mm. Now personally, my preferred focal length is 35mm, which is kind of right between these two focal lengths. And it was quite a hard decision to try and choose between the two because 28 felt a little too wide and then 40mm felt just a little too tight. Ultimately, I ended up with the 28mm because I decided, you know, if this is going to be my everyday camera, I wanted to be able to capture people in an indoor setting. You know, if I was going out with my friends or going out to eat, I want to be able to capture that. Yeah, and then also having that flexibility to crop into 35mm if I wanted to, instead of having the 40mm and just wishing that I had a wider lens. So, in terms of versatility, I got the 28mm. Okay, let's talk about the shooting experience. This camera was pretty easy to learn right when I first got it. Like, you can tell this was designed for photographers. You have 2 dials for the settings, you have the exposure compensation ring, and all the buttons are just placed in the right spots for quick access. And plus, they're all programmable. The only thing I really changed was the function button to snap focus and the video buttons for the crop modes. This is what works for me now, but it might change in the future. Not having a viewfinder took some time getting used to. When I first got this camera, I was putting this camera up to my eye and I'm realizing like, oh, it doesn't have a screen. But yeah, I mean, after you shoot with it a couple of times, you get used to it. One thing that I noticed with this camera is that there is a lot of noise on screen when you're taking a photo, even with low ISO. But once that photo is taken, that noise just kind of goes away. Yeah, I don't know, it's just something to note. Autofocus is okay. I think for casual shooting, it's fine. When you are trying to get some quick subjects in focus using the autofocus, it's really a hit or miss. I know snap focus is also an option for when you do want to get something quick, but when you're working with less light, that can be a little bit of a challenge. I've also noticed that in some scenarios where I'm taking a picture of a still subject, this camera still does misfocus. Maybe it's user error, but I think it kind of sucks that the autofocus isn't always reliable. Also, because this camera is so small, I find myself accidentally turning up the exposure composition when I'm just resting my thumb on here, and that can be a little annoying because when I'm trying to take a photo, it's severely overexposed, and I find myself trying to bring it back to normal exposure, and I end up missing the moment. However, the plus side of this thing is that it makes one-handed shooting possible. You're able to have like a kind of flexibility in framing because it's just so light. And so I find myself kind of experimenting a lot with, weird angles with this Ricoh. The 28mm focal length was an adjustment. I think, for everyday moments, when you're taking pictures of like a group of people or if you're eating out, it's a great focal length. It gets everybody in the shot, and I don't feel like I have to go any wider or tighter. However, when I am trying to compose a photograph outside or trying to isolate a subject, that's when I can really struggle. I find myself struggling to fill the frame or needing to get a step closer, and I find it hard to kind of isolate my subject. It just makes everything a lot smaller than what I'm used to, so I probably need some time to just work with this focal length. It's a quite challenging focal length, but it definitely creates a lot of space to add more context and to play with layers. Alright, let's talk about the images in some of the JPEGs. Now, coming from Fujifilm, I've never been completely happy with the straight out of camera JPEGs. I always find that I have to tweak them a little bit, and they don't always resemble film that realistically. And I mean, with digital, I know that it will never actually achieve how film looks. But I've been playing around with some of the recipes on this camera, and I find that they are actually quite close. And I specifically love the positive film recipe by Ricoh, and I'll put it on the screen. Pretty nice, right? I mean, I feel like I prefer some of these JPEGs to what I've gotten out of Fujifilm. I mean, my personal preference is to always shoot RAW for that flexibility, but honestly, I'm very, very impressed. Now, as for sharpness, when this camera gets things in focus, it is sharp. It's a little sharper than what I can get out of my Fujis. That's quite insane to me because this camera is tiny. It kind of makes you second guess yourself why we have such big setups when this little thing can produce such amazing image quality. Overall, this camera is great for everyday use. It's small, it's easy to use, it's intuitive, and most importantly, it does not get in the way. Probably the biggest selling factor of this camera is that it just gets you out the door and you don't have to think about it. And the more you are able to get out of the door and bring a camera with you, I think that is so much more valuable than any other spec or anything in this camera. And also, people are just more at ease when you're pointing this little thing at them rather than a big setup where people often get quite intimidated. Yeah, it's not the most fastest and it's probably not the most durable, but I'm really happy with it, and I think honestly all of those pros far outweigh the cons, and yeah, I'm really happy with it. I just hope it doesn't die on me anytime soon. Yeah, I find myself taking a lot more photos on this camera rather than on my phone, and I'm really happy about that. And yeah, I'm just being like a little more intentional with my photography every day. I don't think this camera will be a replacement for my full photography setup. I know there are people out there who have just fully converted to this little thing, but I find myself really missing a viewfinder, and that 28mm focal length is just hard to adjust to, and maybe it just isn't for me, but I'll spend more time with this thing. I mean, that being said, this camera makes for a great supplementary camera, and it's also now a great backup camera for me. But yeah, in the future, I'd love to make a long-term review of this camera, so once I get a little bit of time with this thing, I'll have that out in the future. But for now, I'm just really excited to keep shooting.